Angel's not going to move on me again, is it? Hang on, let me check. The Time of Angels and Flesh in Stone. First two-parter of the Stephen Moffat era. First two-parter for Matt Smith. And the first two-parter of Series 5. This is... okay, this one I've always filed under good but overrated. Or at least historically. I have a feeling people are a bit softer on it than they used to be. Although I'm not sure it's because of anything that actually goes on in this episode. I think it's mostly because the Angels are now pretty much universally recognized as having diminishing returns each time they showed up again. And so people now tend to bemoan every appearance of the Weeping Angels that isn't Blink. But I actually had issues with this thing from its original airing. So for my part, I'm going to try and not get hung up on their later appearances and how well they were or weren't used then. This story, in and of itself, is a bit of a mixed bag for me. For a number of reasons. And it is a combination of being incredibly intricate and articulately planned, while at the same time leaving me with a lot of, wait a minute, moments at the same time. And that is really frustrating for me because I like to think I'm pretty good at meeting something halfway, at accepting it on its own terms when it comes to things like willful suspension of disbelief. That's why I don't get overly hung up on things that, oh, but it was this before if we're dealing with completely different stories. As far as I'm concerned, when you have something like Doctor Who, then for the most part, certain things that connect episode over episode accepted, but for the most part, because every story is in a new setting, in a new time period, with often a brand new villain, you're allowed to reset the bar for what is or isn't, the acceptable level of willful suspension of disbelief. Some people can't do that. I usually can. Where I have problems is where elements don't feel like they don't play fair. They don't play by the rules that they themselves appear to be setting out. And there's some of that at play here, despite the fact that, as I said, it feels at times to be really carefully, meticulously plotted. And then there's other stuff that's like, okay. So, here we go. Return of River Song. That's fun. And I like that. And Alex Kingston, thankfully, her flirty energy works just as well with Matt Smith as it did with David Tennant. Even though Matt Smith is a very different Doctor than David Tennant was, it still bounces off the energy that she's bringing very, very well. That was actually something I had been really afraid of way back when this first aired. Is it going to feel like the same dynamic? And for the most part, yeah. Yeah, it does. A bit different on the Doctor's part because now he knows who she is. But like for her end, nah, that's keeping true to it. Amy's great. I really do like Amy a lot. And revisiting this series is really reminding me how much I liked her. And Rose fans are going to hate on me for this. I'm going to continue to compare her to Rose because, again, her opening pitch as a character on paper could have been very similar to Rose, but she is very different. So, here's a good example. When she sees the Doctor flirting with River, or River flirting with the Doctor, and the Doctor more or less accepting it, she's intrigued, and she starts teasing him and ribbing him for it. I couldn't help but think, boy, if this was Rose, she'd be pitching a little passive-aggressive fit right now. But Amy, despite the fact that it will be demonstrated by the end of the episode that she does flat out have the hots for him, that she's just like, oh, well, okay then. And I just kind of like that about Amy, personally. So we have the return of the Weeping Angels. We have the wonderful Ian Glenn playing Father Octavian, who's in custody of, not in custody, has Riversong in his custody and is basically monitoring her. The whole setup with the Byzantium is kind of cool. I actually do really like the Doctor in the museum and him just going through wrong, very wrong. Ooh, one of mine. That's a great moment because That's the kind of thing that I always imagine tends to happen between adventures of Doctor Who. Between situations where it is life and death, is the Doctor doing stuff like that. So I love moments like that. Obviously, you can't have a whole episode that's nothing but that. But I like when those moments get slipped in, and I feel like we get a glimpse of a more laid-back day with the Doctor. So I think that's really cool and really fun. So let's talk about the Angels. The Angels, I actually think, are pretty well utilized here. We get some new wrinkles in terms of how they operate and the way that they function that I think are pretty neat. The whole thing with the image of an angel becomes an angel. First, we get with the TV monitor, which that's creepy as heck. The way that builds and how that plays out. And then with Amy, that it's literally in her eye. It's like, oh, crud. And I remember thinking as I was watching it, oh, is this going to now be like, well, why didn't they crawl into the eyes in Blink? But then two things occurred to me. One, they could only see the angel's eyes like towards the very end of that thing, because prior to that, the Angels always had that going on. And the other thing is, I'm prepared to take as headcanon that when the Angels basically permafroze each other, that basically would have canceled out whatever residual image any one of those specific Angels would have done. Now that's headcanon in my case, but it's enough that I'm prepared to roll with it. Now, when I say that elements don't play fair, the main thing that I'm talking about here is the cracks in time. And I'll decide this as I get towards the tail end of this series, but I may have to devote an episode entirely to this specific series arc. Because, first of all, like, I'll admit to having a distaste for it because it fits the mystery box template that I'm just sick of and don't particularly enjoy. But beyond that, the rules of these things are really all over the place. And they basically seem to be, the cracks in time do whatever we want them to do for this particular story. And I'm okay with them functioning differently under different circumstances, but it's not really ever acknowledged. It just kind of happens. And the big example here at this point is, because now we basically see what the cracks in time do, like, and why they're a threat. Because up to this point, they were just kind of there. I don't know why that's there. Keep showing up. That's weird. Now it's not actually posing a direct threat. But first episode of this series, the 11th Hour, they were used as a portal. Prisoner Zero used it to escape from one point in space and time to another. And the cracks never function like that again. And that's kind of what I mean by it's not playing fair. It's not obeying its own rules. And I will readily admit, we get very loose and scant things as to how these things work. And normally that's enough for me to roll with, okay, I don't need it explicitly laid out. And I don't unless you've got it doing stuff that feels contradictory to the other stuff you also having it doing. That you kind of do need to cover. And it doesn't. And there's also a lot of little tiny moments that just don't quite work for me. So, like, when the Doctor stays behind briefly and the Angels catch him by the back of the coat, why did they freeze? Because they're behind him. So, like, one of them grabs his coat and he's like, ah! And it's stone behind him. Why? He can't see it. He can't, he doesn't crane his neck back to be able to see them. And then he runs away, his back to them, and they don't give chase. They're still frozen. Who's looking at them? What? Huh? Also, this seems to all really violate the Angels can freeze in the sight of each other rule, because there's a massive amount of them, and they don't appear to be freezing from the sight of each other. I mean, maybe that's why they froze, but if that's the way it works, then like the whole way that they would have to move as a group is like one gets this far forward, then this, and like maybe kind of, but the way they're visualized doesn't really quite flow and jibe with that. And again, even if that is the reason that like they froze when they grabbed the Doctor's coat. Whichever ones were furthest forward should have been able to chase him, yet somehow they didn't or couldn't. And it wouldn't bother me if the Angels as an entity, as a villain, felt so carefully thought out and plotted and so meticulously applied the last time that they appeared, and in certain aspects of how they appear here. But then in other ways it's very sloppy and very, very loosey-goosey in terms of how it's working. And it's that contrast. I can work with looser rules, I can work with tighter rules, but it's when you appear to be operating by tighter rules but are actually being really loose with them, you start to bug me. You start to annoy me when you do that. I also, and I've mentioned this before, I don't love the fact that basically this problem would have solved itself. That the Doctor is not an active participant in the defeat of the Angels. The reason they lose is because the thing that they were already doing, draining the energy from the ship, meant the gravity gave out, meant they fell into the crack, and that would have happened regardless of whether or not the Doctor had shown up. So, I've gotten a little better on that point in general, but I realized why I was so hard on it in the past. It's because the show tries to paint it like he did something, and he didn't. Because, when he says to River and Amy, get a grip, which is a good line and a good strategy once he realizes something that nobody else has, the fact that River goes, oh, you genius, and then the big triumphant music hits, his theme, as if he made this happen. And she's praising him like he tricked them into a situation. He didn't. All he did was recognize the situation they already created for themselves. He's not a genius, he's lucky. And I'm okay with the Doctor skirting by the skin of his teeth and being lucky. Honestly, I'd like to see it more often. But don't play it off like this was his plan. I have a feeling that that's why that thing stuck in my craw more. So it's not the fact that he's not an active participant. It's the fact that the show is presented in such a way that it's like trying to trick you into thinking he was. And he just wasn't. So that irks me a little bit. I have mixed feelings about the supporting cast on this. River, I mentioned, is great. Ian Glenn, fantastic. I especially love the last line he says to the Doctor, I think, sir, you knew me at my best. He's wonderful. But we have an entire squad of completely useless, faceless, I would say nameless, but they do all get named, but who cares? Just soldiers. And that bothers me because, especially in a two-parter, I would like to feel like these are fleshed out characters. I would like to feel the dynamic that they have with other characters that isn't just following orders. I want it to feel more like the team on The Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit. Or the team in Waters of Mars, which wasn't a two-parter, but was a special, so it was longer. Or Ross from Sontaran Stratagem, Poison Sky. I want that kind of feeling if you're going to give me a two-parter with characters that continue over the course of it. But we've just got fodder. The only one who gets any personality at all is Bob. And they also bungle some of the ways these things are executed. Because if you haven't rewatched this in a while, prior to Bob getting killed and his voice becoming Angel Bob, which is actually quite cool. I do enjoy that. So again, like I keep coming, I'm doing mostly complaining this, but there are a lot of things, a lot of moments, a lot of lines, a lot of ideas, a lot of specific scenes that are great. But, like I said, I feel like this thing gets overpraised and I need to nitpick a bit here. But prior to Bob, there are two other soldiers. There's Angelo and Christian. And they go off, and then one of them goes off on his own to check something, hears over the radio, Angelo, come and look at this. Then the other one goes off. So, we know they're dead. And then the same thing happens to Bob. The thing is, we have gotten to know Bob, and we care a bit about him, but we now already know that this entire thing is going to end up with him dying. There was no need to show Angelo and Christian going off and implying that they got gotten by the Angels. What should have happened was, Bob was just sent off, go to the entrance with Angelo and Christian. He goes, they're not there. And then the scene plays out as it always does. He hears over the radio, he goes to check out where they say to meet them, and then he gets killed. The earlier thing, showing the two of them, adds nothing. Similarly, when the soldiers are checking out the crack in time and they start disappearing, it's Crispin and it's Pablo, and there's another one whose name I can't remember now. But like they go through 3 segments of them going and then disappearing and not being remembered. It's at least one too many. You don't need to do it this many times. I do wonder sometimes if Stephen Moffat, if he thinks his audience aren't as clever as he is, because a lot of the clever ideas, it's happened to a certain degree in his earlier stuff, but it's like a big offender in this one, that the clever ideas get signposted or reiterated one more time than is necessary to make the point. It's like he thinks we're thick. Not completely, but like enough that we need to be shown. Demonstrate it to them one more time. Let's be sure they're caught up. And that's what it feels like. It feels condescending. And actually, as a result, it makes Amy seem really dumb because she has nothing to do. All she can do is like, well, tell me what's going on. Tell me. And like, they tell her, but she keeps going, tell me, because we have to stretch out this scene because we have to go through this entire cycle with 3 different sets of characters. Why? Absolutely no need for that. Similarly, the thing about the Applands having the 2 heads, that gets signposted, I'd say at least one more time than it needed to. I'm not going to knock on that one too much because I, at least to my memory, my first time watching it, I didn't catch it until I was expected to. So fine, but I think I still would have caught it if you'd signposted it one less time than is actually in there. I think it still would have worked, and then it would have lessened the risk of me having figured it out before the other characters. There's a lot of great ideas here, and overall the structure of it I like the thread of it. I think the angels are really well used here. Regardless of what you think happened with them later, I think their use here is solid. The new ideas brought into play with them are cool new ideas. But there's a lot of small moments that don't work. There's a lot of ideas that could have been presented better or could have been presented more smoothly or subtly or just, with a little bit more respect for the intelligence of the audience at times. It is still good. I don't want you to listen or watch me complain about this and think it means it's not good. It is. But it's not this episode specifically, because I don't actually feel this about Stephen Moffat at his best. But definitely in this instance, he's not as clever as he thinks he's being. Not on this one. And I'm getting that sort of resentment that I get when I watch something or I read something by someone who at least it comes across like they think they are distinctly cleverer than their audience. And it comes across at times as condescending and self-congratulatory. And I get that vibe off this 2-parter. Not massively, but it is there a little bit. And it does soften my enjoyment of what is otherwise a pretty dang good story. And again, it's still good. I don't skip this one. I have rewatched it prior to doing it for this. So I do enjoy it, and so many fantastic lines. The doctor, oh, you breed like rabbits. I'll never be done saving you. There's so many great little lines like that from him, from Father Octavian, from River, from Amy. Great moments. The doctor comforting Amy in the forest, especially if you know what happens later on with the Big Bang. Like, great stuff, but just for how tightly some of this is, how loose other parts of it is, and that it's going from that tight, loose in the same story. Yeah, that bugs me. Time of the Angels and Flesh and Stone. Have you rewatched it lately? What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's other stuff down there as well. There's the stuff that you know, because you can subscribe, you can like. There's also a Patreon. You can support me there. Any amount helps, even $1 a month. And given that I'm doing 4 videos a week, that works out to be pretty cheap on a per video basis if you want to help me out there, help grow the channel, help me cover my bills. In addition to that, there's other stuff besides. Links to my socials. There's a P.O. box if you feel like sending me stuff. Some folks do. I appreciate it. But in any case, so many things you can take a look at. Click on them or don't. You don't have to, because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings, and until next time, this council is adjourned.